Hello, everyone. It's Neil again, and you're listening to The Big Bad Movie Show. And this week I'm flying solo, a little scary, and I'll be watching Transformers the movie from 1986. This is the feature that they stuck between season 2 and season 3 of the original Transformers TV show. And if you have your DVD copy, Blu ray copy, digital copy, or even pirated copy, you can watch it along with me. All you have to do is set your copy at 0, pause it there, and when I say play, that's when you start. So we'll count down from 5, and on 0 we'll play. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, play. The Dino De Laurentiis Entertainment Group, responsible for the 70s King Kong and Flash Gordon. And here is where you would start the original DVD copy, because apparently someone decided to scrub Dino from any involvement in this movie, I guess. I'm watching the Sony DVD, so this is the one where they boosted the colors a bit, and I'll talk about that later. Kind of made it a little too gaudy for my taste. But otherwise, I really love this animation. Now, back in the 80s, I was always a big cartoon fan, but I have to admit that a lot of those early 80s cartoons were really bad. You know, like Smurfs and, I don't know, Alvin and the Chipmunks. Really, really terrible cartoons. And then we started getting Japanese animation. And it never really hit me that this was animation from another country. And it started with stuff like Mysterious Cities of Gold and Inspector Gadget and The Littles. All these cartoons that were animated really, really well, and all had this kind of unifying aesthetic that I never quite put it together. And to this day, I really can't explain why you can just look at anime of that era and immediately know what it is. Something to do with the line art and just the theory of coloring. I don't know, it still kind of eludes me to this day, but it's definitely one of those you know it when you see it things, and it's what led me to loving a lot of anime that was produced around this same period and later. Like once I figured out what this was, that's when I moved on to stuff like Project A-ko, The Dirty Pair, uh, Crusher Joe. Irresponsible Captain Tyler, Venus Wars, Macross, uh, all that stuff. I love all of it. And it all has this look to it. And I remember when I was a kid, I would kind of mourn the fact that Transformers went down the shitter, because I I had kind of this attitude that, like, oh my God, where did it go? When is this cartoon going to get better? It's going to get good again eventually, right? And it just never did. And I found out that this type of animation didn't go away. They just stopped using it for American TV for a little while. And some of it came back. They used TMS a lot for like Animaniacs and Freakazoid and Batman the Animated Series. Oh, here comes the cast. Eric Eric Idle gets top billing because he's first in the alphabet. And Breakfast Club. Spock. Elliot Ness. Um, who was he? The driver in Heart to Heart? Kane. His last movie role. The Micro Machines guy. And Weena McCater as the Hopping Woman. Yeah, so apparently Orson Welles talked to his publicist after recording this movie and didn't really have kind things to say. He kind of described it as him playing a giant toy who does cruel things to other toys, and there's a lot of violence and gore and stuff that he didn't really care for. And then he died shortly after recording this, like a matter of weeks, if I remember correctly. And poor Peter Cullen here is playing two different characters, and they both get offed really early in the movie. Really get shafted. Although I asked Marv Wolfman how soon after this movie was released did they suddenly decide to change course, and it was like a week. Got tear-stained letters from little boys who locked themselves in their rooms because their hero died. Apparently none of them really realized what kind of icon Optimus Prime was. Because he was kind of like your dad. A lot of kids, a lot of little boys gravitated to that. Because your hero is always your dad. Well, mostly. Kind of cool to see Spike grown up, but unfortunately he breeded. You know, I always liked Cliffjumper. He was kind of the salty version of Bumblebee. Had a little bit of an attitude, had kind of an edge. I gave away all my Transformers, but I kept him. He's the only one I still have. Nelson Shin. Now, Nelson was he was an animator on some of the last Pink Panther cartoons. Uh, the DePatie Freeling animation studio got sold after Friz Freleng retired, and they sold it to Marvel, and that's what became Marvel Studios. And Sunbow was, I think, the ad agency for Hasbro, and that's how this team-up got made. I always thought it was kind of neat that Soundwave's tape recorder form, that's pretty much the only form that could have been. You could never have like a Transformer who's a CD player or a VCR, because that just doesn't work. You know, it's not as cool as a tape deck where you have a mechanical object and then the door opens and there's another mechanical object inside that can become another robot. It wouldn't work for a VCR because a VCR is just kind of stationary. You can't take it with you like a tape deck. And here's where we're traumatized as kids, watching all of our heroes getting slaughtered in a continuity-breaking piece of logic, because in the series, these characters were always bad shots. They rarely hit each other, and even when they did, they didn't get hurt. Now all of a sudden, they're blowing each other away. Just getting executed on the spot. But if you expect continuity from the Transformers, you're in the wrong place, because G1 is a mess as far as continuity goes. Kind of weird hearing Megatron talk about Autobot City. It's the only point in the canon where you see characters like Megatron interacting with the new characters from Season 3 and talking about places and events that you don't associate with Megatron or Optimus Prime. Now I got to talk about the colors, because they boosted the colors for my version of this, which is the Sony re-release from, oh my god, I think it's from 2006. That was a while ago. But anyway, they boosted the colors, and it looks a little too bright, in my opinion. I think they fixed it for the Blu-ray version, though. And this animation is gaudily colored as it is. It doesn't need any help from someone using a filter. This is completely dangerous. I guess at the time we thought kids were indestructible, which is why we gave them stuff like the pogo ball and whatever. I forget that toy where it's like a box you put on your foot, but it has springs in it so that it makes you jump high. Really dangerous. It was caused a lot of kids to break their ankles. I really love the background paintings here. Uh, I've kind of developed my own theory of coloring that I don't want to call it drab coloring, but you kind of desaturate the colors in the background to make your characters pop. And even if you use lighter colors on your characters, they still tend to look a lot brighter and a lot more colorful when they're in contrast to a much more desaturated background. It really helps when you add all these glowing effects that I love. You know how their eyes light up, and you see the kind of that hue around their lit up eyes. That's kind of a neat effect from this cartoon. And I'm a graphic artist. I'm always kind of trying to mimic this style. And I guess a lot of people really don't like the animation style of this era. I guess a lot of people are kind of glad it's gone and nobody's really doing it anymore. And I don't know where that attitude comes from because we all loved it back then. It's kind of the basis for what we used to call Japanimation back in the early '90s when we used to raid like Hollywood Video and Blockbuster looking for stuff to feed our need for this type of stuff. Akira. I kind of like my old animation, little cruddy, a little bit of the film grain everywhere. Stuff today looks way too clean as far as I'm concerned. Have we talked about the soundtrack yet? Vince DiCola, who did this song and did most of the background music that you hear in this picture, did a really amazing job with this. He does kind of a synth rock type soundtrack here. It's one of my favorite film soundtracks ever, and I'll listen to it if no one else is around because I'm still a little self-conscious about liking a soundtrack to a film that was made for children of the '80s. Still kind of self-conscious about being a complete dork. Now, Ultra Magnus is the only Diaclone toy in this cartoon that's completely new. Everyone else was made specifically for the movie, and the toys were designed later. Everyone except for RC here and a couple other characters. There never was an RC toy, and I'm not really sure why. We kind of expected one to exist, but I guess Hasbro was still of the mind that little boys didn't want a girl character in their toys. Of course, that completely conflicts with the fact that there were girls in G.I. Joe. But who knows? They never made one in the original line. There have been several RC toys since then. But another thing is a lot of the movie toys, because they were made after the animation models, and the animation models were not really designed to be toys, I find that the toys based on the movie characters are kind of the crappiest ones of the entire line. Like, in particular, the Galvatron toy is just kind of like this brick, and Springer is not very good. Wheelie is kind of crappy, and I was really disappointed in Rodimus Prime because Rodimus Prime he's just a stiff toy. He has two points of articulation at his shoulders. And to transform him, you lift up his chest and you fold in his arms, and then you just attach the rest of the truck. And that I I just found that really disappointing, especially after the fact that Optimus Prime was like the best toy in the entire line. Now, have you ever noticed that the Insecticons and the Dinobots were never in the same episode together in the entire run of the cartoon? Go back and check, it never happens. And that's weird because in the toy commercials, they were positioned as rival factions, and even in some peripheral pieces of merchandise, like anytime there were like coloring books and storybooks based on this show, there was usually a Dinobot versus Insecticon product. I mean, there was Five Faces of Darkness, in which the Insecticons showed up, and then the Dinobots showed up later in the same episode. But I kind of associate that with that being an ACOM error. ACOM was kind of fond of sticking characters into an episode where they're not called for, just because they had the model sheets and they would just stick anyone into a shot that they felt needed to be there. They were the ones that would stick Bruticus next to the Combaticons and stuff like that. And if you don't know why the Insecticons should not be in season 3, they're basically canonically out of the show as of this movie. Now, some of Blur's lines I think is really kind of silly. He says a lot of things that are repetitious and oh, did you see Reflector in that shot? He's seeing Reflector in this movie is very rare. He's even more rare than seeing Snarl. But anyway, Blur's lines are really repetitious and they sound silly if you slow them down. He says a lot of stuff like absolutely, positively, definitely, and later when he's trying to get the Dinobots into the shuttle, he says into the shuttle like 3 or 4 times in a row. Daniel is not as bad in this movie as he would be in season 3, especially with him hanging out with the Wheelie. Devastator. At this point in the story canon, there should be like 5 combiner teams, but since this was conceived at the tail end of season 1, the aerial bots and Protectobots and all those guys, they didn't exist yet. So they react to Devastator like he's the big bad here. That's a great line. Don't think lasers arc like that. Now here comes the coolest Transformer team of the entire generation. The Dinobots are so cool because, first of all kids love dinosaurs. And second, they were overpowered and stupid, so they were this magic combination of awesomeness. And they came in at a time when there really wasn't any other gimmick team. So the Decepticons were either planes or gadgets, and the Autobots were all cars. And this kind of broke that sort of differentiation by adding an animal team to the Autobot side that were all dinosaurs. I always thought Dare was the better song. It matches the soundtrack a bit better. I always thought this song was kind of hokey. And it was inexplicably used in Boogie Nights, sung by Marky Mark, who would eventually become a character in Michael Bay's Transformers. As a joke, I put something on social media when Transformers 4 was getting ready to come out. I said, "Here's a leaked scene from Transformers 4," and it was Marky Mark singing "The Touch." It's one of those funny things that came full circle. Now here's where it seems like the movie's coming together again because you were just introduced to all these new characters. Now we're finally back to having Optimus Prime versus Megatron. So now it's feeling like classic Transformers again. And I recall that when ads of the movie started showing up on TV, they teased the death of Optimus Prime. I vividly remember Victor Caroli saying, "Does Prime die?" And I thought for sure he wasn't going to die because somehow I got on Hasbro's mailing list and I got this huge promotional package for the movie. And it was all this stuff, talking about what the plot of the movie was and, you know, being vague, kind of beating around the bush and not really spoiling the thing with Galvatron. But there was this one image that it was a bunch of Transformers fighting Unicron, and among them was Optimus Prime. And Starscream was there, and Galvatron, and all the new characters were there. And I thought for sure that that was a shot from the movie. So I'm like, well, no way does Prime die. He's right there at the end of the movie. So I was a little caught off guard by this. The background, that looks terrible. That looks terrible too. Now watch this. When Starscream got his foot caught earlier, he had to blast his foot off. And here he's going to kick Megatron with the same foot. I was talking earlier about how logistics don't work in Transformers, and that applies in particular to anything involving scale and gravity and mass. Like here, you have Astrotrain, who's the size of all the other Decepticons, but he can transform into a shuttle that has all of them inside of him. And it gets worse later, and I'm sure everyone listening to this knows what I'm talking about. Now, even as a kid, I thought it was kind of silly that Prime would die in this way because he's a robot. You know, if he had gotten blown to bits or smashed or something, that's one thing. But it's not like he could have organ failure. They should just be able to fix him, especially since there are there is one particular episode where he gets taken apart and it's just his head. Like they find his head and they're able to communicate with him without his body being there, and he's okay. But here he gets an abdomen wound and, that's enough to kill him. But again, I'm kind of nitpicking the Transformers, much to the chagrin of all the people out there who love this cartoon. I love it too, but part of the love is picking it apart. The fact that I'm so indignant about the bad episodes of season 3 should at least clue you in that I am a huge fan of this cartoon. Because if I wasn't, I wouldn't care. I would just write it off as a piece of crap, like a lot of other cartoons. Now, I've always kind of seen the Matrix as being very ill-defined. Like, what exactly is it? Is it a massive source of power? Is it a repository for the wisdom of the ages? Is it robot heaven? It seems to be all of these things at once. And while that can certainly be the case, it seems that all these properties are also synonymous with each other. So if you release the power of the Matrix, you're also releasing the wisdom, as is done in a late season 3 episode. It seems to be whatever the writers want it to be, which is a hallmark of this series. Even though this makes no sense, it's still kind of cool. And we don't even know why the Matrix is the one thing that can hurt Unicron. We never really get a complete account of what the Matrix is, like where it came from. It's kind of hinted at in one episode, but they kind of avert from actually explaining it. A lot of the lore from this series comes from the fans, which is something I find both cool and aggravating at the same time. Because there's a lot of fanon that I don't really like stuff to explain the wonky science of the series, and I don't really think that adds anything at all. It's just people with their priorities in the wrong place. And I don't really like being an apologist for canon. I think there are some episodes that you should just take out of the series. Like there's multiple origins of the Constructicons, and instead of trying to have them all make sense, just pick one and delete the others. That's my position on it. Devastator inside of Astrotrain, kind of a funny prospect. And there's an episode of the series in which Omega Supreme grabs Astrotrain with his claw, and Omega Supreme and Devastator are supposed to be the same size. And the fans really come up with a lot of wild theories about how all this stuff works. Some fans have come up with a theory about mass shifting to explain how someone like Astrotrain could be the same size as all the other Decepticons, but then become a shuttle that houses all of them. Or they'll have something like pocket universes to explain where Optimus Prime's trailer goes. I mean, who cares? I mean, fans come up with all sorts of weird theories that sometimes they kind of break series lore. Like I know a guy who thinks that Megatron and Galvatron are not the same person, and the reason he assumes this is because Scourge and Cyclonus don't retain the same personalities of the Decepticons that they were made from. Therefore, Galvatron does not retain the personality of Megatron. And it doesn't make any sense because in this scene, Unicron is trying to bargain with Megatron to get him to destroy the Matrix. And one of those conditions is that he gives Megatron a new body. And if Galvatron was a new character, then he could have just done away with Megatron entirely and just made a new character from scratch. He wouldn't need to bargain with Megatron. And Megatron, when he becomes Galvatron, he actually starts quoting himself from earlier in the movie, like saying things like, "I'll crush you with my bare hands," and he talks about how easy it was to kill Optimus Prime. I mean, that's a big clue that he's the same character. And in fact, when Optimus Prime returns, he even says, when Galvatron's trying to pump information out of him, he says, "I know you too well, Galvatron," which is a wink to the audience that that these are two old foes. This is Megatron. I mean, for all of the continuity glitches that are in this series, Megatron and Galvatron being the same guy is the most consistently established thing in the entire series. And it's actually important to Hot Rod's story, too, because Hot Rod is responsible for Prime's death by trying to go after Megatron, and facing the same character at the end is part of his redemption. And again, it doesn't really have the same impact if you assume Galvatron is a different guy. Because listen to me having an internet argument with nobody on a commentary track. I don't know. It was just something that I found very amusing that someone would be very insistent that this was the case, and it's just not in this cartoon at all. I mean, there are just people out there who will jettison a story arc just so they can have world consistency. And to me, that's someone who's just missing the point. Now, this spaceship is cool, but definitely getting a Star Trek vibe from this. Now, here's something you can see coming from a mile away, even when you watch this movie for the first time, because you know Galvatron is not going to put up with Starscream. My sister laughed at this joke. Yeah, my parents did not want to see this movie when I was a kid, so they talked my sister into taking me to see this, and in spite of expecting her to hate this, she actually found it pretty funny. She kind of saw the charm and the humor the same way I did, which I'm glad somebody did. Sadly, with the death of Starscream, that's kind of the last remnant of this movie that we can associate with the first two seasons. It it becomes an entirely different cartoon from this point on. Okay, you got Jazz and Cliffjumper here. Now, Scatman Crothers, from what I understand, Jazz was supposed to be in season 3. For some reason, they kept him around, even though his toy was discontinued. I guess they wanted someone from the first season to still be around to kind of provide some continuity. But he had fallen ill and actually died shortly after this movie came out. And you still see Jazz in the background of certain season 3 episodes, but he's just he doesn't factor into any of the plots of the episode of this third season. And Casey Kasem, I guess, had a problem with the way one of the characters was portrayed in season 3, a Middle Eastern character, and he bowed out entirely. Although I don't know if Cliffjumper was ever going to be in the show again. Now there's kind of a continuity glitch here because they reversed a couple scenes, and this in the script this is where Galvatron would be shaking his fist at Unicron because he just ate a couple of the moons, and the moons belong to Galvatron, goddammit. And then this scene with Bumblebee and Spike would happen later. But they swapped them, and now because of that, there's kind of a continuity glitch coming up that I'll point out. The music here is great. Now here comes the famous line. Now that's what got this movie a PG rating. But if this was released today, this would be an R, just for all the violence, all your favorite characters getting blown apart and melting from the inside. So here's what I was talking about: Galvatron kind of cursing out Unicron. No, I want you to actually time this from the point where he says, Decepticons to Earth. Time how long it takes him to get there. And it's not like a lot of time would have passed because here he turns around from just having talked to Spike and Bumblebee, right? So we're just moments after the moon being destroyed, and Galvatron just left Cybertron. And while these guys are babbling, having this really, really short conversation, that's how long it takes for Galvatron to show up on Earth. I mean, how long was that? Like 40 seconds? So, that line, it sounds like Cyclonus is talking, but it's actually Scourge. And the reverse of that happens later in the movie, and I'll point it out. See, some of Blur's lines just sound really, they're just repetitive and redundant. Listen to how many times he says, get in the shuttle. And it seems like that repetition is just there so that John Machida doesn't just blaze through these lines, because otherwise he would just say one thing and it would just be like that. Okay, since I'm starting to kind of run out of things to talk about, I guess I'll talk about the TV show a little bit, particularly why I don't really like the season 3 stuff and even the rebirth, which was the truncated season 4. You know what? I'll just start with the headmasters. That season 4 was was when they brought in all the new 1987 toys. You know, the toys where the heads would come off the robots and turn into smaller robots. And someone thought that this was a tactically good idea. Like, for some reason, my head will come off and become my partner, and then I'll be stuck as a vehicle. And that's even brought up in the cartoon. There's a point where the Nebulon characters revolt and detach themselves and run away, and the Autobots are like, we're stuck as vehicles without our heads. And that was just that just exemplified everything I thought was wrong with the headmasters. I really didn't like that concept. And plus, it was done in 3 episodes, and it was done at breakneck speed. You barely got a chance to explain anything, so it was one scene after another of them explaining the toys as fast as they could. That made no sense to begin with. And the Japanese version of the cartoon, when they did the Headmasters as their own season, they explained it that the heads, the smaller robots, were actually the actual robots, and their bodies were built later so that they would have larger bodies, and they could use them as vehicles as well. So they basically reversed the whole concept so that the smaller robot was the real robot, and the body was just kind of like a vessel. And that made a way more sense to me. And I'm guessing that that dueling robot doesn't make it. See, it's tonally it's completely different from the beginning of the movie now. Like these new Decepticon characters that are flying in the new Decepticon mother ship here. I don't know. I can't really picture the other Decepticons, the goofier Decepticons from season 1 and 2. You know, being aboard that ship. They don't seem to match. And we've accepted right away that these are the Decepticons. These characters that no one has ever seen before. That is completely different from Megatron's faction. Okay, now that line in the script it says it attributes it to Cyclonus, but most people assume that it was Scourge who said that. kind of a running gag in this movie that Perceptor tries to over-explain things, and Magnus just wants a simple explanation. Kind of a weird thing with the censorship of the soundtrack here. How the name of this band is actually Kick-Axe, but I guess that was a little too racy for Transformers. In a movie where someone can say shit, we can't say Kick-Axe, so they're credited as Spectre General. And earlier in the movie, there was the song where Ironhide and Ratchet were getting blown away on the shuttle, and there's actually an unedited version of that song. I guess, again, words like torture and foreplay were not acceptable for Transformers. Now, the way I kind of see the season 3 cast of Transformers is that they really tried to condense down the core cast so that instead of having this ensemble, you have the wise mentor character, the youth, the I don't know what you would call Ultra Magnus, but he's basically like William Riker in Star Trek. You have kind of the rival smartass, which is Springer. He and Hot Rod are, I don't want to say they don't get along, but they kind of trade jabs every now and then. But they kind of pared everything down to a much smaller core cast instead of having so many characters in seasons 1 and 2. Of course, when the 86 line came out, they had discontinued all of the Autobot cars. Like all of those guys, all of the original Diaclone toys were gone, and they replaced them with Hot Rod Coupler and Springer. I love sarcastic lines like that. Whenever I write, I try to get little asides in the dialogue like that. The one-liners. Give the autopilot a raise. And in Rebirth, there was a character who made a comment about how they need a new PR man, which I thought was funny, so I stole it and used it in a comic once. I love how they differentiate the female characters from the male ones. If you're a male robot, you're built like a brick, but if you're female, you have curves. Nobody hears this. And doing what they did with the characters allows for more complex relationships. Like right here, how you can have Cup and Hot Rod being teamed up, and one's the wise older character, and the other is the hot shot, and they just kind of feed off of each other very naturally. kind of a classic relationship, the old and the young. Of course, all of these characters are supposedly millions of years old, so that never made sense. But logic and Transformers, not something you should. If you have high expectations of this, you're going to be really disappointed. The universal greeting, you would think that that's something that would come up in the series, but it never does again. They certainly go to a lot of alien planets where that would be useful, and would have been cool had they used it in season 3. But because of the breakneck speed at which the show had to be written and not a lot of cross-checking going on, you didn't have much continuity. I mean, it was a matter of luck that they were able to connect the character Ariel to Elita 1 in season 2. That someone just happened to mention it, that there was a prior character, and so they worked that into War Dawn. That that Alpha Trion was able to convert Ariel into Elita 1. Now, the robot there, I think that's just Kranix. They used that same animation cell later. There were Sharkticon toys, but there were not Quintesson toys. They were really kind of inconsistent, I guess, in how they adapted the movie characters. I always wanted a Quintesson toy. I was disappointed that they didn't make one. Also, I don't think the producers of this movie really cared whether or not some of these characters were made into toys. They weren't making them to be toys. They were just making them to tell a story. And you can also see that in Autobot City, how Autobot City as an entity in the cartoon is not anywhere near what Metroplex would be. It's designed completely differently. It wasn't like they made the movie to advertise a new playset. Although I believe that's what they did in My Little Pony, the movie. That the conclusion of the movie is them getting the new ranch playset, which I thought was really cheesy. The one and only time I watched that movie. And these movies basically, I don't want to say bankrupted, but they they were hemorrhaging money from Marvel and Sunbow, and really caused the death of this team up. That's why there wasn't anything produced after G.I. Joe the movie. That was the end of it. But I think Marvel Productions ended up being sold off to Saban, which was kind of sad, but it all ended up back at Disney anyway. Sunbow continued on, and they produced another My Little Pony cartoon in the 90s that I never knew about, and wish I hadn't because it looks wretched. Speaking of wretched, here's Wheelie. Wheelie is the season 3 replacement for Bumblebee, who is also in season 3, but he's not featured as much. But Bumblebee would get the last laugh in that one because the Return of Optimus Prime had a scene where a bunch of the Autobots got got blown away by Superion, and one of them was Wheelie, and supposedly this is the team that was going to be joining up with Optimus Prime, except Wheelie never returned, so I always accepted that as the canonical death of Wheelie. But unfortunately, although Bumblebee was also in that group, he got turned into Goldbug, which is one of the ugliest G1 designs of the old show. I don't think Dan Gilvezan was particularly fond of Goldbug. It's another case of Blur just blathering things repetitiously. Now these guys were aiming guns earlier. Are they going to attack? They're just kind of chilling out back there. Are there even that many Decepticons in the toy line at that point? Like, who were all those guys? Watch them leave Daniel high and dry. See you later, kid. Yeah, they just leave him. Why don't they just pick him up? Let him ride inside RC. Oh, there's one of the Insecticons. He's not supposed to be in this at this point. But I think the script actually calls for him to be in that scene. You know, Transformers and consistency. Not something that exists. See, how does the power of the Matrix work? Is it just like this? It's whatever it needs to be in the plot, that's what it is. Like, if he was able to open the Matrix, what would it do at this point? Would it actually hurt Galvatron? Does it only hurt who you want it to? Supposedly this is where he gets drawn and quartered, which I actually do think that's right, but the fan commentary talked as if you could tell from the acting that he's being pulled apart, and I don't know about that. But it is kind of aggravating here that Prime gets an abdomen wound and dies, but Ultra Magnus gets blown apart and he lives. Really infuriating as a child. Would have really loved a playset of this too. The Sharkticon pool. Probably would have been really expensive though. Although nothing was ever as ridiculous as the USS Flag of the G.I. Joe line. Where would you even put that? And I often wonder how people even got that home. Things bigger than a Prius. Did I mention earlier how it's weird that they always wind up on planets of transforming robots? You would think that just once they would land on a planet that had organic life. Seems like there's transformers everywhere in the universe. And if you land anywhere even remotely habitable, they'll be there. They never explain how Wheelie got here. Like, why was he on this planet? Just some random Autobot who got stranded and needed help. He didn't need a story arc. He's just there to sell a toy. And that is the last time we'll have to put up with Wheelie for this movie. It's just a flesh wound. How big was Springer in that shot? He was like twice as tall as everyone else. Now, I do believe that all of Rekar's lines are super safe. Like, it sounds like he's quoting movies and TV shows, but they're all very generic. Stuff from like infomercials, like op uh operators are standing by, offer expires while you wait. Stuff you would have heard multiple times just from infomercials. This is another case of characters not being entered into the toy line. Only Wreck-Gar wound up in the toy line. None of the other Junkions. That's too bad because a lot of us kind of imagined what that would have been like. Like, what if the Junkions could come apart and attach? Like, you could take arms and legs off of one and put it on another. Like, just have these modular robots that would have been really cool toys. This movie's just flying by. It's only got 20 minutes to go. It's a really short movie. This is kind of a ridiculous scene. Like, isn't there something more important we could be doing right now? Isn't there urgency to get to Cybertron? A lot of his dialogue in this movie is very hard to understand because he's so overmodulated. They have such a process on his voice that even the closed captioning for this movie, if you turn it on, certain lines will just say alien language because even the people who produce this DVD have no idea what he's saying. He could be saying something completely dirty and they would never know. No, they put his legs on wrong, I noticed. See, and he's fine after being blown up. Now let's go back to Earth and get Optimus Prime. Really jumping to a lot of conclusions here. They heard Galvatron's name once, and they know exactly who he is now and where he's going, and how this all fits together. It's like he went to Unicron. Well, we have to destroy Unicron now. Which I thought was the premise to begin with. Now here's Frank Welker's voice layered on top of itself over and over. And here's a layer switch. May or not ruin the sync. I don't know. I'm not really riffing the movie, so doesn't need to be exactly on the money. So this is Galvatron back to being a pompous butt like he always was as Megatron. Now, in the promotional package I brought up earlier, it does spoil this that Unicron is a giant robot. So this did not surprise me when I saw this in the theater. By the way, I only saw it the one time during the original run of the show. I didn't see it again until after the show was officially done, when they did the season 5 with the puppet version of Optimus Prime who would talk to Tommy, that annoying kid. Season 5, unfortunately, aside from the movie and the pilot, was just a compilation of the worst episodes of G1. Had Five Faces of Darkness, The Rebirth, Return of Optimus Prime. Then there was the birthday episode, which they just threw in randomly. Whereas some of the best episodes were like the Ultimate Doom and a lot of the stuff from season 1. A couple of episodes of season 2, like Desertion of the Dinobots was a good episode. Now, presumably, Ultra Magnus and some of the other Autobots are on that ship, the Junkion ship, which is something you should keep in mind for what happens in a few minutes. Sped up animation right here. Oh, that animation was out of alignment there. There's a really cool shot coming up. Now, what's going on the inside of this thing? How there's like random spikes and things everywhere. Like it just looks like a huge pile of junk. That's a cool shot. The Matrix and Galvatron emerging from the darkness here. Here's some reused animation. See, they're able to fly around him like he's the size of a skyscraper, basically. This guy is not the size of a planet.
Uh-oh, there's a rumbly in his tumbly.
Stupid kid. Why don't they just carry him? I mean, they're already bigger than him. They're gonna be able to run faster than him. Why did they take him? They should have just left him with Blaster. Because you're not supposed to put that much thought into this. That's a very small story glitch in the overall. Uh, for Transformers overall, that's a very small glitch. It's like I'm worried about why they bring a kid along to stop a monster planet, and meanwhile there's Devastator inside of Astro Train. Now you saw how many robots are getting dropped into this acid pit, and only only three of them survived. Three Autobots and Spike. You know, I certainly hope no one we know is getting killed here, like Trailbreaker and Gears. They're not the ones getting thrown into this thing. And that was a very Rube Goldberg device anyway. Why would that why would that be a thing? Why not just put them into like a huge garbage compactor and just be done with it? Instead of having the claws that are on a conveyor belt and the factory music from Looney Tunes, you know. Dun 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 dun. He's choking a robot. Now remember, Perceptor and Ultra Magnus are on that ship. And there they go. We're okay. Yeah, I know. Shut up, Neil. Okay, this song is only like 4 minutes long, and this is the entire ending of the movie right here. You don't hear Vince DiCola again in this movie. It's kind of a wonky animation thing. Him throwing Galvatron, it doesn't look right. There's something you never see again. Also, the Matrix doesn't open up like that ever again. When Prime uses it in the series, it doesn't do that. Again, everything I said about continuity applies here. He's supposedly tearing himself apart looking for the Matrix, but that doesn't really come across. Except for, I think, one part where you see his hand dig into his into the hull, and you see it from the inside. It's right there. And that's the big line. Funny thing about Rodimus Prime is that they used the entirety of season 3 to give him a character arc where he's always kind of second guessing himself and wondering if he should really be the leader. And then in what was originally supposed to be the season ender, he finally decides that, you know, he belongs to the Matrix as much as the Matrix belongs to him, and he's going to be the leader he always should have been, and he's going to live up to the example set by Optimus Prime. And then in the very next episode, he's like, oh shit, the hate plague is spreading. We need to get Optimus Prime back. And then Prime promptly takes the Matrix from him and empties the darn thing, so we never see Optimus Prime again. Yeah, this movie just kind of flies by. I thought I was going to have a lot of dead air, but yeah, that worked out pretty well. You know, I think I'll definitely have more people watch movies with me, so you know, I'll get Mike Blanchard and JT to do movies with me. But although they might be pissed at me for doing this, I did this without them. Of course, Blanchard would probably argue with me over all the shots I take at the animation team and animation mistakes and stuff like that. That's part of the love I have for the show is just being disappointed in some of the bad episodes of the series. I mean, I didn't really understand what was going on in season 3. I was waiting for that time that the animation would pick up again. And, just being a silly kid, I didn't really understand that the best of it was behind us, and it's just time to move on. I mean, it was around, well, not really this time, but a couple years from the release of this movie. That's when Roger Rabbit came out, and the Ren and Stimpy show would be a couple years after that. There was also the New Adventures of Mighty Mouse that came out that really brought back old style animation and kind of left this stuff in the dust. For good and for bad. I mean, like I said, I like this style of animation, but really wasn't cutting it after a while. It's stuff like the Disney Afternoon that there's really a really nice renaissance of animation in the late 80s, early 90s with Animaniacs and Batman. There's that one really cool Peter Pan cartoon that came out and never saw the light of day again. I would really love to see that on DVD or Blu-ray. Really obscure. Not a lot of people remember it. And somewhere early to mid 90s is when I discovered anime. Of course, back then it was just called Japanimation because we were dorks and decided that was, oh, Michael DePatie. I guess I should look that guy up. He's probably the son of David DePatie. Yeah, like I said, Japanimation, just a portmanteau of Japan Animation. And I guess some people don't like that. But yeah, I'll probably watch some of the movies I talked about, Venus Wars and Slayers and stuff like that. It's like that's where this style of animation actually went. It just went right back to Japan. Never really went away. They just weren't using it for American television anymore. I think they looped the song because I'm hearing, I don't know, I'll have to go back and check. Because I think we already heard the guitar solo and it's building up to it again.
And if you would like to be on the show, you should drop me a line, say something in the comments or something. We can, I don't know, maybe watch something on Netflix or find some way to. My cat is bugging me. Find some way to sync it up so that we watch the movie together over the internet. Or if we happen to have the same DVDs, we can kind of sync something up that way. But yeah, like I said, I'd like to get Blanchard on here, JT, maybe Guru Larry, some of the other guys. Let's see who's interested. Just a fun way to spend a Sunday evening, I guess. And you can hear my cats bugging me. I guess I should go check their food.
Thanks for listening.